Abbie, thank you very, very much for being our guest speaker tonight and bring some saltwater perspective and some other perspectives from your personal experience becoming a guide and coming back to New England from Montana. I think you probably cut your teeth out there, but that your passion sounds like it was the salt, and that doesn't stop you from, hitting the fresh water too. So hopefully people will get an idea of what Abbie's capabilities are, her operation out in the vineyard. I would love to get out there too. I'm going to ask a question in advance. So what open dates do you have on how hard is it to get out there and do a day trip, or do you have to get out there like for at least the night before? But we can save that for later. But I have not fished the vineyard yet, so maybe you can touch base to that. So I think you're a co-host, so I am going to.
Yeah, let me share my screen. Can you guys see it?
Perfect.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. It's fun talking to some local people or local-ish people. At any point you guys have questions, just interrupt me or yell out. I'm happy to answer anything I can. Okay, so being from Boston, you guys know where the vineyard is. It's actually a super easy trip from Falmouth, New Bedford, or New Bedford. It's easy to come over for the day, early season and late season, and if it's good weather. There's a lot of ifs there. I'm happy to pick people up in Falmouth. But a lot of the time, if someone just wants to come for the day, we can just pick you up in Oak Bluffs or Vineyard Haven. We do a bunch of wade trips. We have all the beach permits, and we fish for Chappaquiddick, which is a pretty incredible fishery. You have to have a beach permit to fish the beaches there, and so they're pretty limited. So you can get to some really cool remote water. Even during this 5-week-long fishing tournament, it's still pretty remote over there. But we fish the whole island. I run a 23-foot Parker and then an 18-foot beaver tail. We have a lot of flats over here that we fish, so that's where the beaver tail comes in handy. I got that last year. It's the best thing ever. I'm so excited. Touching on the Cheeky tournament, I don't know. I think some of you guys fished it. The biggest fish caught was 27 inches out of 600 people, which is pretty crazy to me. I hope the bigger fish will be on their way, but we were catching them over on this side of the Cape way more than on this side. So that was just us. We also caught some nice ones in Falmouth. That was the biggest ones we've caught were in Falmouth, North Falmouth. But yeah, it was just a funny year this year for the tournament. Oh, one thing I have to say though, if you're planning on coming over to the ferry, you take the Steamship Authority and you can walk on, it leaves like every hour. But if you are taking a car, make your reservation just to come out to the island, like ASAP. They do fill up the ferries. And you can always get on or off with standby and stuff, but it definitely helps with the reservation. So we are fishing for, on the island, striped bass, bluefish, false albacore, and bonito. We also fish for black sea bass, and then tuna, marlin, shark, and mahi are here. Our bread and butter is the top 4, though. So the striped bass will come in April 15th was the earliest one I saw this year and last year, actually. But little schoolies, year round, you can fish for them. We have a lot of ponds. It's pretty interesting because Martha's Vineyard is just sand, basically, mostly, especially like the south side. So a lot of the ponds will be open in the summer and big storms will come and close them up in the winter or fall, and stripers will get trapped in there. And there can be some big stripers in there throughout the winter. They're definitely obviously not as active, during January, neither are we, but they're there. And then this April and May, it was really, really fun fishing for them. Bluefish are just starting to show up right now and will continue to get better as the season goes on. The bigger blues should come any week now. I haven't seen any big blues yet. I haven't seen many bluefish yet, to be honest. I haven't heard of a ton of people catching them either. But they're here. And within the next few weeks, they'll be here. And then the crazy thing about bonito is they start coming more and more every year, earlier and earlier. So typically it was August, September, and now it's like July, August. And then the Abbies come in September, October through November. I don't do a ton of offshore stuff just because they're in a 23-foot boat, single engine. But I do take clients' boats out there, and it's pretty incredible the wildlife you can see out there. So how this presentation is kind of going to go is throughout the seasons and how it changes. One of the reasons, I mean, I guided in Montana and Washington and Alaska, and I loved all of those fisheries, but definitely by the end of the season, well, you're always tired, but I was a little burnt out. And I think it was because it was almost the same thing every day. Here, it's impossible to be bored, I think. I'm on the water every single day. I'm just so excited every day because every day is so different. Right when you're like, wow, okay, stripers are great, but then the big bluefish come, and then this bonito comes. So it's constantly changing. So right now we're in schoolie season. The bigger ones are definitely starting to come. This is one of my favorite times of year besides for the fall because of the flats. We have some amazing flats here on the island. And yeah, they're incredible. So when the water gets about 70 degrees or more, that's when you are going to want to focus off the flats a little bit. But right now, the water's pretty cold still. Parts of the island still 53 degrees, but up in the flats and up in the ponds, such as this one, it's up in the 60s. So they're pretty active there. When I'm fishing the flats, I'm doing a few different tactics. I'm using a floating line and an 8-weight rod, typically at this time of year. And then these are the flies that we're using: the crab fly, the poppers, the shrimp, and then sand eels and stuff as well. The biggest fish I've caught on the flats have been with a crab fly. The flats here are the fish. It's like fishing in the Bahamas, but way harder, is what I tell people, because they're so spooky and they're so smart. When you see those big 30 plus stripers on the flats, like they've been around for a while. They know what to expect. But the key is having a long leader and a crab fly, in my opinion. I've definitely seen them eat tons of other things. A clouser that is tan with white and a gold tinsel works really well. I think that works better than the traditional clousers. But, sometimes there's just a lot of bait on the water. You'll see they're just picky. So the crab, if you can cast it about 10 feet in front of the fish and do one long strip, so kind of the slack gets out, it looks like it's moving, and then just short little strips the whole time, they'll usually turn for it. A lot of the time, specifically with crabs, they'll like poke at it, and the second you stop stripping, they're gone. So what I like to do is short little strips and speed it up. So it's kind of like how you would imagine you would behave if a giant fish was trying to bite you, swimming away as fast as you can. So you speed up that strip. Poppers are really great all year round, really, but specifically now, and a lot of the flats and, the Cape has this, Boston has this, they'll be very shallow and then it drops off. So on an outgoing tide, I really like to use poppers off that drop off. A lot of the time you can get some big bluefish that will come up from the deeper part. I don't see a ton of bluefish on the flats, but they'll come up from that deeper part onto the flat and just demolish that fly, which is really fun. The shrimp patterns, I use the same ones I use in Mexico, little gotchas. Enrico makes some really amazing like squimps, which is shrimp and squid. Those are really, really great on the island and the flats in New England as well. This is my box in the beginning of the season because it's like very nice and organized. Give it a couple weeks, it's gonna look way different than that. But you can see that it's a lot of pinks and tans. 'There's definitely some green crabs in there. I find that like this little shrimp thing in the green is a really, really productive fly to use. And it's just so cool. It's a lot, you have to be more patient with a crab, but it's so cool catching them with a crab. Like really, I've used the same exact flies in Mexico on those flats for permit and bonefish. So we fish both from shore and the boat. The key is when you get to the flats from shore, is just like step back for a second and just observe. It is a little bit harder, in my opinion, just because you don't, unless you have a ladder or something, or you're like super, super tall, but it's hard to see where the bait fish or the stripers are just because you don't have that vantage point. We run a lot of paddleboard trips as well. Our paddle boards are over 3 feet across, so they're super, super stable. And that's a really cool way to do it because you have that vantage point and you get really stealth in there, which is really fun. But right now we have no plankton in the water and we won't until the water gets warmer. So it's even more clear than, July even. So if it's a calm day, even if we're going for big fish, I'll put on a 12-foot fluorocarbon leader. Or even long. I mean, 14 feet is a little excessive, but and kind of hard to cast. But you really do want to get a really long leader on those calm days because the fish are so spooky. So definitely fluorocarbon. It depends what you're fishing for. With you're using fluorocarbon leader, you can get away with a floating line, and I actually do recommend that. Especially if you're using a crab, but if you're just using, if it's a windier day or there's, some seaweed in the water or whatever it may be, you can get away. You can use an intermediate line and that kind of just drops it down immediately. Or if there's a lot of fish and then you're just right in their zone. As the season progresses, as the spring progresses, I'll go up and tip it more so because the bluefish will start to come. Also attach like a little wire leader on the end. Cortland makes a really great tieable leader, and that's helpful. But when I get to the flats, I kind of just chill out for a second and we'll stand right here. And what you're looking for is discoloration of water, because that's usually bait fish, or literally wake, and that's schools of fish. It's sometimes hard to see them because you're not above them, but if you can just see any weird movement in the water, that's great. I will always have my clients start from shore. Don't go in the water because a lot of the time the fish will push the bait against these shelves, and many flats have these shelves. It's not huge, six inches to 2 feet of grass and mud. And the fish will trap the bait against that wall. And it's like the poor bait fish. It's like a buffet line though for stripers because they can't go anywhere. So I'll have my clients start kind of where she is right here and cast out and strip all the way to the shore. I'll also have people cast, parallel to the shore with just pretty slow one-hand strips. The flats don't have a ton of current. The bait fish, unless you're getting hit, then you'll speed it up. But they're in their like safety zone here. Another thing you can do from shore that's really helpful is look for, what was I gonna say? All around. Oh yeah, look for the trenches. And so even if it's 2 inches, 3 inches deep, you will get, the stripers will come in through that. And then if you can cast at that, that's really, really helpful. The key though is us saltwater people love to cast as much line as we can a lot of the time. Fish come in really close. So mix it up, start close and then work your way out. That goes with a very short cast, and then you can step in the water eventually and work your way out. But stripers usually do have a pattern, and if you can figure out what that is, that's a really good way to do it. So the boat fishing is a little bit easier just because you have the advantage of the boat. But it's so fun when you see them because they'll come in big schools and they behave the same as bonefish. So The bigger fish will be on their own, one or two of them. It's kind of cruising around, and then you'll see huge schools of fish. And typically, not always, but typically they're the smaller fish that are more prone to eat. One thing that you don't want to do is line them. So you really want to cast, because you'll spook the school and it'll be done for a little while. So you really want to fix, it's hard for me. I'm like not a chill person at all. So it's very hard to sit back for a second and watch, but kind of see the pattern these fish are casting or are swimming. And then pick up your line, take one or two false casts and put it 10 feet in front of them. One long strip, short little strips. Because stripers are so aggressive, especially when they're in a school, they will go after it. And once they're all going after it, short, fast strips. And then eventually one will take it. If you're in your own boat, one thing I recommend, I like to anchor personally, so I can on the beaver tail, I have a little engine that can go, but it's good to either anchor and turn off your engine or go upwind and drift it without your engine on. The fish are just so spooky during that time. So the fish, it's turning on now, but once it will end around, it depends, when it's about 70 degrees, it will end. So, we have to get it now because it's so much fun. And one thing that I look for on the boat, and you can do this from shore too, are these little eel grass beds. So the stripers kind of travel. If you're not seeing fish, doesn't mean they're not there necessarily, especially a flat like this, which is like 3 or 4 feet. It's not that 1 to 2 feet. But the eelgrass bed holds a whole ecosystem. It holds crabs, shrimp, bait fish, everything that the stripers eat. And so the stripers kind of travel from eelgrass bed to eelgrass bed to eelgrass bed. And so if you're not seeing them, cast first at the edge of the eelgrass bed and then progressively make your way through the whole thing. And a lot of the time you'll be able to pull some off. The cool thing, and it's very helpful, they're a lot darker when they've been on the eelgrass bed, so they're a lot easier to see. Sometimes the seaweed will stick to their sides and you'll see a darker fish, and that is very helpful because the stripers, when they're on the flats, they'll actually turn this beautiful blonde color. And if you're out on the rips fishing and you catch this, it's crazy to catch one that you could just tell was on the flats because it's like the color of my hair, which is a disaster right now because I was fishing all day. But it's very light colored. So yeah, if you're not seeing them, definitely cast at those beds, especially crabs work really well there, or the tan clousers, like I was saying. And this is a flat on the vineyard. Isn't that crazy? Like that's like the Bahamas. So most flats I like to fish on the incoming tide because it's pushing the bait in. And I'll start at the edge of the flat and kind of work my way into the flat, looking for those channels that I was talking about, finding their pattern. But some flats are definitely, you can do an outgoing tide, but general rule of thumb, incoming tide is a better time. And a lot of people, when they think striper fishing, it's 4 a.m., let's get after it. But it's really not for flats. You need that sun. The best time is noon. You need that sun above you so you can actually see the fish. So as we progress into later in the season, or later in the spring season, we'll start to see bigger bluefish and sea bass, and we'll move to the rips a little bit. So this is an example of one of the rips we fish frequently. And you can just tell it's so full of life. So I'll hold my boat right here and you fish it kind of like a river. You'll cast up to here, let it dead drift a bit. And right about here, when it's about 45 degrees behind you, you give those jerky strips. And those strips mimicking either a squid or a fish that's like trying to push through that current. Sometimes I'm holding my boat in like 8 knots and just to hold still, which is crazy. But more times than not, you're going to get your hit right here, right when it drops off. The island has some crazy rips all around it. This is Way Squee, if any of you guys have fished Way Squee. It's the southeast point of the island, and there's tons of shoals all the way around where it literally will go from 2 feet to like 10 feet to 90 feet. They're pretty dramatic. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And basically how that's working is the bait is just getting sucked to right here, and the bass are just sitting right here. And it's just such a visual experience, because the best time is June for this, because you're fishing in early July, because you're fishing the squid migration that we get. But the squid are jumping out of the water. It's like National Geographic. The birds are diving down. The bass are surfing the waves. I had a client a couple years ago be like, Abbie, it's too seaweedy here. Look at all this dark stuff in the water. And I was like, that's squid ink. It's not seaweed. It was just black, the water with squid ink. And it's just a very, very visual thing. You can use a floating line here. I like to use a sinking line here, actually, just so you can get in that. The water is moving so fast that if you can just get a little bit under the surface, a lot of the time you'll get some bites. It's a really great fishery too for newer anglers, because you can kind of like have them cast out and then let it drift back here and then strip it up. So along with the squid, we're getting in our bigger sand eel patterns. Peanut bunker as well, but the bigger fish, the bigger bait. And there's been times literally it looks like it's raining, but it's just clouds of bait everywhere. It's really, really fascinating. This is a dream when it's this calm. The fish are so spooky. But when you're fishing the rips, though, you really don't need, because there's this much bait in the water, you don't need that 12-foot leader anymore, 10-foot leader. You can fish them, especially with squid, a 4-foot leader. I mean, if it's windy out or you have someone on the boat that's not newer to casting, it's a great time to just not have to deal with that, and you can cast that, because the fish really aren't that spooky, because there's so much in the water. There's so many squid, there's so many sand eels. Last year, he's one of my favorite. He's a great client of mine, and I can make fun of him because I do it to him. He caught this really nice fish and had a tag from New Jersey on it, which is pretty interesting. And I was releasing it, and all of a sudden my reel smacked me in the back of the legs. And, before I even knew it was happening, my Thomas and Thomas rod and my hatch reel were floating away with a striper right on it. And it's because the squid fly was bouncing on and off the swim platform, like right by the engine. But they're just so aggressive when there's this much water, this much bait in the water, that they'll eat right at the engine. It's crazy. Major bummer about that. Anywhere else I would have jumped in, but you saw that rip. Not good to leave the boat in that, or swim, really. There's sharks out there too. But one thing that you really will get more fish is if you strip it into the boat, or if you're fishing a rip from shore to the shore, because a lot of the times it's deeper water. They're looking at it, and right at the last second they'll eat it. So these are some of the squid we're using. This is obviously a fly. These are real. I'll use squid up to 4 or 5 inches. My favorite squid is a red and purple squid. And I use that on like darker days or early mornings or evenings. When it's a super, super bright day, you can use these peach colors, or even a white squid or a light pink squid. One secret that I found, I mean, this fly works really well, but I've upgraded since this photo was taken, is a bigger eye. I think squid flies with the biggest eyes around are perfect. They work really, really well. And so you kind of want to mimic, you want to pretend you're a squid. So you cast it out, one hand, jerky, strips, just like squid swimming through the water. And
Abbie, can we ask a question about,
please.
Since we're on squid season here?
Yeah.
Matthew Murphy asks, what's the typical time window for the early summer squid runs?
So till the first week of July is a safe answer. I've had them till the end of July some years, but first week of July, like mid-July, July 15th, or so and before.
When does it start? Starting in June?
It's just started, actually.
Okay.
So like 3 or 4, what was it, last week, I went squidding one night just to like see if they're here, and we couldn't find a squid to save our life, like literally under the fairy lights, like exactly where they are. Caught some stripers, which was fun, but didn't see any squid. But in the last like 2 or 3 days, we've had these warm nights, and they have been out. It's crazy out on the island though. We're having a crazy commercial squid season where the squidding boats are like basically out sitting outside of Edgartown Harbor, which is like, it's insane to me with these huge lights. It's not the best, but the squid are here. And it happened almost overnight. So they're here. It's usually about a month long, a little over. The fall, they'll come back around too.
Thank you.
These are some of my favorite flies. These are about 6 inches long. And then what I love about these is that the top is it kind of like floats. So it's kind of like dives down and floats. So it makes it a very interesting, squid looking. But the thing that I think really makes this is the tinsel in it. You do want a little flash in them. So when I'm using these squid, and basically throughout the rest of the season, I have 20 to 40 pound tippet on with intermediate or sinking line. I kind of put away the floating line pretty much for the season, actually, at this point. The reason I'm using such big 40 pound fluorocarbon is the stripers, when there's that much bait in the water, are not picky, unlike the flats. If you go back to the flats, switch it out again for the 12 pound or 16 pound at most. But they're not picky. But the bluefish have these crazy teeth. I have scars all over my hands and feet, actually, from them. And they have a harder time biting through the 40 pound. You can use a wire leader, like I was saying. If it is a calm, clear day, though, specifically if it's calm, I would forget the leader, even the tieable wire leader, and put on that heavier fluorocarbon. You definitely get more stripers that way, unless you're targeting bluefish, which are an incredibly fun fish. When I get to the rips and finding some nice fish like this, you're really looking for the birds. If you're not seeing birds, it definitely doesn't mean they're not there. What you're looking for is along the rip, there are different depths, even though it's obviously shallow to deep or deep to shallow, depending. You're looking for with little shelves that come out in the rips. And typically that's where bigger fish will hang out. It's a little bit less current. They can kind of hide down and they'll be there. We kind of just touched on the bluefish, but yeah, you really do. If you're targeting them, you really do want that wire leader. They're crazy, mean fish. I don't know if you guys have caught them before, and it's interesting on the island. I mean, growing up, we caught them all the time to the point where people were kind of like, bluefish. But now in the last few years specifically, they've been actually really hard to find. The south side of the Nantucket has really good blue fishing, but and we get it too, but they're harder and harder to find. They're being regulated now, which is, I think, a really, really good thing, because their populations, in my opinion, have been dwindling. We get a ton of small ones, but because they're kind of viewed as like a trash fish, they're not really they're just kind of being thrown around and not put back with the same respect stripers are. And I've definitely seen a drop in their population. Definitely. So black sea bass is kind of a newer thing to me, I guess, or the island. So, I mean, it's always been here, but in the last few years, black sea bass population has exploded. So last year I was fishing in the Elizabeth in the fall, and I thought we were looking at, the whole boat thought we were looking at bonito. You know how they kind of like act like dolphins? But we raced over there, so excited, and it was black sea bass. It was crazy. We've been finding more and more of them, even on the surface. Typically, if you're targeting them, I do all catch and release. but I do occasionally keep a black sea bass because they are very sustainable and delicious. If you're targeting them though, after a blitz is a really, really good time to get them. This is my logic, so I don't know if it's true or not, but I think bluefish are such messy eaters because they're so like absolutely crazy that a lot of, half-eaten sand eels and bait fish are kind of floating around after a blitz, and the black sea bass will kind of come up and eat those. So if you do want to get them with a fly rod and with intermediate line, or even floating, actually, you can get them through that. They are really beautiful fish, and they're fun. So July and August, there's definitely always a week in the summer where I just feel defeated because it's hot. It's like in between. It's not even a week. It's a couple days. It's hot. There's not that many fish unless you're just not sleeping, which is fine. And so you kind of just have to designate a couple weeks to not sleeping. When it's too hot, the stripers kind of hunker down and they will pretty much only come out early morning or evenings. We are so lucky on the island because we do get a full season of stripers. I think a lot of that is because of all of our rips and crazy currents that we have, but a lot of these stripers can go down to that deeper 90-foot water where it's cool and still be getting a lot of bait fish all the time. We're not really fishing flats a ton at this point, and I'm not really doing full days. I mean, I'll do them, but with a very huge disclosure of it's going to get hot and we probably won't see fish at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But yeah, this is changing though. Like I said earlier, the bonito are coming earlier and earlier every single year. And it's been really interesting. I think, obviously climate change is happening, but I think being on an island, you just can see it so much. It's just so apart. It's here. I mean, it's crazy. Like this winter, South Beach totally got washed away from storms. The storms are getting worse. The black sea bass are all over. The stripers aren't as much. The blues aren't as much. Well, the stripers are, but anyway. And bonito are here in July. We had bonito in July last year, which is great as a guide because that couple-day lull didn't really exist. But if you're targeting stripers or bluefish, you want to wake up really, really early or stay up pretty late. Like I was saying, the rips are really, really great for that because they can sit in these 90 deep holes and they'll come up to fish. The rips are great at any moving tide. There's not really a specific tide on an ingoing or outgoing. Some rips definitely have more seaweed on an outgoing than others, but as long as the water is moving. During slack tide, the first part of slack tide is actually when I've seen the biggest stripers. This is my logic yet again. I think it's because they're so smart that they realize, oh, I don't have to work this hard because I can just go in the currents a little bit lower and still eat all the fish. So I'll definitely hang out a little bit into slack tide to see if you can get those big fish. One thing, if you're on your own boat, some of the rips do get pretty sloppy just because it's changing currents. So just kind of be aware of that. Excuse me. So there's a ton of plankton and stuff in the water at this point. So you definitely can be using your 40-pound tippet if you want. I don't really go below 20, 25 at this point because there's really no reason to. But we're getting all sorts of stuff. The squid are down deep. There's not a ton of them during this time, but they're still here. If you're not seeing anything or there's tons of sand eels, which happens a lot, it is sometimes great to put on a squid, let it sink with your heavy line, and then strip it up. Sometimes you can pull up some big stripers. But the fun thing is that peanut bunkers become very prevalent during this time. Here they are. And I use Mike Rice flies for this a lot. He ties some really awesome, his name, Mud Dog flies. He ties some really awesome peanut bunker patterns. So does Enrico. So when you're fishing this time of year, you really want to match the fly with the light. So the darker it is, the darker the fly. So I'll be using these peanut bunker right here for the darker days or cloudy days. And then same here, and then these two for lighter. Same with the sand eel. So this is kind of the rips that I was talking about. And when you're looking at a chart and kind of finding where you want to go, this is a really good way to figure out where fish are. So basically, like I was saying, it's really, really shallow here, and it's really deep here, like 50 feet, 54 feet, 63, and it's 9. It's really now like 2. But you can set yourself up and kind of cast over and drag it off. So the fish can hang out on these deeper areas and then come up here to feed. And that's how we get stripers in the summer. Also, you're looking for current. So these are the Elizabeth Islands. We fish these as well. And current just cranks through here. I mean, it's crazy. I had a client sink a boat here once, which is really scary. But there's just so much current. So you're really looking for a current just because there's a ton of fish, there's a ton of bait moving through, and it's just cooler water being brought in, oxygen, cooler water. So you're looking for current. These are some nice midsummer fish. So you can definitely still fish from shore during this time of year. Once again, current. So like Tajmu, they have a really good jetty. Menemsha on island, it's a really nice jetty where you can get your fly down pretty deep. And I use these flies that we carry in the shop. I'm sure you can tie them too. They're clousers with huge, heavy eyes. And they're kind of a pain in the neck to cast, but they're really, really productive during this time of year. They're pretty long. They're about 4 inches long. And what you do is you cast up current and you just let that baby sink. Let that dead drift till it's about right in front of you, and then slowly bring it up. You can also let it drift almost all the way and then bring it up along the jetty. And a lot of the time fish will be hanging out in here. So my general rule of thumb is outgoing tide and fishing the end of the jetty, incoming tide and fishing more inside the ponds or whatever. If it's a really, really hot day, I kind of do stick to the mid to the end of the jetty because that is the deepest water. So you're kind of looking for those canals as well, and little eddies where bait fish just can't get out of, and stripers will be hanging out in there. So bonito, some of the best time. I'm always like a little bit tired by the end of August, guiding every single day for the last 4 months, but I'm like a born again person when the fall comes because it is a whole new fishery. It is so much fun. They can't see at night, so you fish for them all day. I'll start doing full day trips again. You definitely don't have to do a full day trip because they are pretty tide based, but yeah. So bonito, the tricky thing with them is they do have teeth and incredible eyesight. So it's kind of like you have to play with it a little bit. I won't use a wire leader typically because their eyesight is so good. The water is also starting to clear up. The plankton is kind of starting to move on. So not quite as much as September and October, but it's definitely starting. And you'll notice it if you pay attention to it. But so I'll still put on that heavier fluorocarbon, 25 pounds, 20 pounds, and one strip set and just try and bring them in as fast as I can. When the bonito are here, you do really want to start using only a 2-handed strip. I found, in my opinion, that that's exponentially more fish. Shore fishing for bonito is so much fun. This is a wonderful client of mine. She is newer to fly fishing, or she's actually not anymore. This is probably a few years ago. And she was nervous to fish for bonito because she didn't think she could cast so far. But she is casting at this amazing school of them, and you can see she's in ankle deep water. Like there was another photo where she's casting back at the land. So they come super, 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 super shallow. So it's a really good fish for everyone. And this is from the boat, just a bonito blitz. That was just so much fun. This is 2 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago. So basically what you do in this is you just cast it. They're not like a striper blitz where on the flats where they're really, really spooky. Just huck that baby out there as fast as you can and strip it in. This is not when you need grace. This is not when you want to worry about your false cast. You just want to get it out there. Be prepared. These fish run. And so you want to be able to tighten that drag system and let them run, of course, but not too long. So my biggest pet peeve as a guide and person is the run and gun method. So if you can, because when you chase up to them, of course you have to chase up to them a little bit, but if you're just going from school to school to school to school, you're not going to catch fish because you spook them every single time you pull up to them. So if you can kind of figure out and read the water, like even here you can kind of see there's a little bit of a current slick. So you're looking for a current slick or a little bit of a excuse me, my dog, or a little bit of a trench or where the current is moving, and kind of just see where the bait fish are and like how the bait fish are moving through the water. Are they getting sucked out from under this bridge? Are they dropping off this? And kind of set up there. That's when you're actually going to land a lot of bonito. We sat here for this, that we were seeing this blitz for a while, and we went up to it and we got a few, but then we kind of set up and they came right to us. The reason was because they weren't spooked. I mean, this is such a crazy blitz, you could probably go up to it, but general rule of thumb is just kind of looking for the slicks in the water and setting up for there, or just seeing how the bait is moving. The water's getting very clear again. If they're moving left to right or north to south, or whatever, try and figure out their pattern and then the fish will follow. It's such a pretty fish, so much fun. So these guys will eat all day long. What you're looking for is current. Many places it really doesn't matter if it's incoming or outgoing as long as it's moving. Similar to sharpers, I have caught them at the beginning of slack, but usually it does shut off for a little bit. So this is a gut on an island. It's a very famous fishery. It's an amazing fishery, but the water here rips. And another great thing is it goes from very, very shallow right here to pretty deep. So if you can find anywhere with a drop off like that, basically where the bait fish is getting pinned against the wall, that can be a really good, spot. And similar to a river, you cast up, let it sink for just a couple seconds. I'm using usually a 350 grain sink at this point. Thomas & Thomas SS, the Exo set is my favorite rod because it does get a bit windy during this time of year, and it cuts the wind really well. But up here, let it drift to about here, and then fast strip in, and then just kind of work your way down the whole beach. Just because you're not seeing them definitely doesn't mean they're not there. So as the stripers, or as the bonito move in, as the albies move in, the bonito, for whatever reason, kind of move out. And they'll coexist for a few days, and they behave very, very similarly, very close to shore and eating the same bait and top water action a lot of the time. But I found in the last few years that if you want to target a bonito in the middle of September, I recommend a boat trip. If you want to catch an albie, you can do either one. By October, the middle end of October, they'll all coexist again. But yeah, I don't know why that is really. The bonito or the one with the teeth, so it doesn't make sense to me. But that's just the patterns I've found. And the bonito, the albies are the same. They don't have, they can't see at night. So you are fishing for them all day long. One question I get asked a lot is the difference between the two. One, like I keep saying, bonito have teeth, and albies do not. Bonito have this like tiger stripe and they have more of a camo. Both fish don't have swim bladders, which is a bummer for them because they die if you don't get them in soon enough. So it is really imperative to get them in as fast as you can. So tightening that drag system down and just trying to get them in. They still will bring you to your backing many times. Last fall, I was so excited. I took an afternoon off. I got to fish. It was so fun. And cast up to an Abbie, strip it in, and I didn't move my reel from under my arm fast enough. And I had the reel handle hit my ribs like a couple times. And I bruised my ribs. I couldn't lift my arm higher than this for like 2 weeks. It was the most painful thing. But it just proves how powerful they are. They can swim up to 40 miles an hour. They're pretty incredible fish. So during this time, people use 9 to 10 weights. That's what I recommend. Guiding only use 10 weights. It typically is pretty, not always, but it's windier than it is typically the rest of the season. So it's easier to cast out. And then you're using smaller bait. So really, I don't change my bait that much. Actually, my fly that much. It's pink, chartreuse, or white. I really like the Bonito bunny flies with a little bit of sparkle added to it, and that works really, really well. Gummy minnows work well as also, and so do these. 2-hand strip, key. But they're small flies. They're not bigger flies. If you want to target stripers, which are coming back on the flats this time of year, which is so much fun, and they're the big stripers heading back down south, I'll tie on a 6-inch fly and just one hand jerky strips, and you'll get stripers a lot of the time. So if I'm not seeing fish on the surface, it definitely doesn't mean they're not there. But so what I do is, and I said this earlier, but it really works with Abbies, is you put on a really heavy sinking line, especially in slower water, like outside the harbor or inside of one of the ponds, and let that sink. If it's like 20 feet or so, let it sink for a few seconds, and then with a squid on it, and then strip it out really fast. A lot of the time, you can pull the Abbies up, and they'll eat it blind casting. I haven't seen that work with many other flies. It's mostly just squid, but you're using smaller squid than you are in the fall. I mean, this spring, just little guys. This is also when the offshore fishing can be really, really great. I don't, like I said, do a ton of this on my boat. I will take my clients out on their boats just because 2 engines is way better than one when you're 50 miles offshore. But it's so much fun because this island is so full of life during this time. A couple years ago, we were catching mahi though, 3 miles offshore. So the Gulf Stream runs right by the vineyard. Sometimes we'll get these fingers that come out, and you'll see tropical fish come out. Triggerfish, mahi, very close to the island. These are the dolphins that followed our boat for so long. And we've seen whales up there. Last year saw hammerhead. The only way I can describe going offshore, I went to college in Montana and guided out there for a while. And you know, when you go to the plains, it's full of life, but it's like this empty, vast space. Is the only way I can describe offshore. It's a really cool experience. This is the squid I was talking about. And there's Rupert, who's right next to me now. Barking at an Abbie. So this is from shore, and you can tell it's kind of a rockier bottom. This is also in the gut, which is a really great spot. So during the fall, we get the Derby. So it's been going for 75 years. Last year's 75th reunion. And it goes on for 5 weeks. It's a long tournament. And it's really when the island is just at its very best. It's a lot of, I love the tourists, but a lot of them are gone. And the fishing tourists and the fishermen, they come in and just totally take over the island. You go out to the bar for a beer after fishing, and no one is talking about anything else but fishing. That's it. It's crazy. It's just totally transformed. So there's a fly fishing and spin fishing section from shore and from boat. And if you win from shore, you win a boat. And if you win from a boat, you win a car. This is one of my clients. So exciting. The big bluefish move back into, like I said, the south side of Nantucket, but you really do want those deeper, cooler waters with a lot of current, and just shoals. You want those shoals for the big blues. This is a really big bass that a woman caught. It was close 30 inches, which is awesome. So yeah, that is fishing the vineyard through the seasons. Yeah, if you guys have questions, my email is Abbie, ABBIE, @kismetoutfitters.com. And always feel free to call me or email me. My numbers on my website. But yeah, it's an amazing fishery. I highly recommend fishing it. Does anyone have any questions?
Mike, I didn't see any more questions come in the chat, but anyone that's listening.
If you have a question, I'd say unmute and speak up, or you can put it in the chat.
I have another question, actually. So with some of what's been going on with some of the striper management regulations, there's been a lot of talk about release mortality. And I was wondering if you had any like good tips on safe handling practices or any sort of things that are really, really important to remember to do when releasing striped bass.
I love that question. Thank you for asking that. So it's really interesting, actually. On Friday, I went to this presentation about releasing striped bass through Keep 'em Wet, or Keep Fish Wet, they changed their name recently. And they've done tons of studies. And they found that the biggest problem with, fish, we're lucky, fly fishermen are the least of the issues, but the part we can do where the fish have the most trouble surviving afterwards is how they're hooked. So if you can debarb every single hook, that fish has such a higher chance of survival because you can just quickly pull it out. Then if they inhale it too, you can very carefully kind of push it down and out instead of, ripping it. So that's what they said the number one was how they're hooked. Another thing that I try to do is I always keep a net with me at all times because the less fish handling, the better. So I like to just keep it in the net and, like they'll hold it for a photo and I think that's totally fine. Your hands are wet and it's great. But that fish is never out of the water for more than a few seconds. What kills me is when someone catches a fish, brings it onto the deck, and then finds their phone for the camera or whatever. Just keep that fish in the water until everything is ready, and wet your hands. If you're on the beach, that is definitely a little bit harder, but their outer slime is one of their immune systems. It's very protecting of them. So if you're dragging that up in the sand, that really is also hard. So just like trying not to handle them as much. And this part I found really interesting is there's not that many, and there's not a ton of studies on this, and so it's still developing. But holding a fish and trying to revive it, there's only been 3 studies on it, but the 3 studies have shown that you reviving the fish actually doesn't necessarily do anything more or less for the fish. What they recommend is holding it in a net until that fish is ready to go. Because if you're holding it and it's not swimming away necessarily right away, it's causing stress on them being held, right? So if you can just hold it in a net where they can freely swim away when they're ready, I think that's a key to do, because at least on the island, the seal population right now is getting so bad that you want to make sure that fish is good and ready to go, but without handling it. So the net is key. And debarb, which will help you if you get hooked, which I have so many times.
My last question is about cinder worms. Do you guys have cinder worms on the island, and have you seen any lately?
Yeah, we did. When was it, like 2 weeks ago was our last hatch. We don't get them as many as like other parts of New England do, but there's some really awesome muddy ponds that we have really, really good cinder worms. And if you're going out on your own, just look for a pond, like a saltwater lagoon or pond that has mud on the bottom. and you'll typically find them near full moon. My dog ties are really good cinder worm fly.
Thanks. Really good.
I feel like I'm just
presentation.
like plugging Mike Rice right now, but he does he does tie a bunch of good flies.
You did a great job with the presentation, by the way.
Thank you so
Really
much.
enjoyed it. Yeah, a lot of good information.
Thank you. I appreciate that a lot.
So I have a technique that I ask a lot of guides. I like wading out in water pretty deep, and if I can get to a sandbar, I like to cast to the shore and then pull it out of the shallow water into the trough. And I find when I do that, my take just increases dramatically.
Yeah, for sure.
So you've used that sort of technique too.
We use that mostly in an outgoing tide. Incoming tide, I kind of like to stay closer to shore because the bait is getting pushed in. But outgoing tides, it's such a great way to do it. That's cool. But you have to be very careful because
Oh yeah.
swimming back has been too many times for me.
Yeah, I've started to switch over to a wetsuit when the water is colder and deeper.
Oh, that's so smart.
Yeah, yeah. So, and they don't fill up like a waiter does. I mean, they
Yeah,
fill up, but
you'll
not the.
stay warm, which is good.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Someone else?
Abbie, that I don't think this is John Ball. I said that was an awesome presentation. That was one of the first presentations. I'm sitting here in my basement, as you can see, with a lot of junk. Oh, you can't see my fly rods. They're all stacked up over here.
I can see them.
You know, that's about 1/3 of them. But all I kept saying to myself is, where the hell is that 7-weight rod? I know it's here someplace. But where is, you said you have a fly shop there too?
Yeah.
What, most of the time when I usually come out of like Hyannis, like Highline or something, and it goes to like Vineyard Haven. Where is the fly shop? Is it near, what town is it in?
So I should have like worst business owner ever. I have a fly shop. It's in Edgartown. So it's 204 Upper Main Street in Edgartown. It's on, I have an online store on my website as well. But it's on Upper Main Street in Edgartown. So you can, the bus stop actually from Vineyard Haven is right in front of it.
I think the last time, I think people don't realize how big an island it is.
It is a big island.
We brought our bikes. I had my father, and the people are great. We took our bikes from Vineyard Haven and rode them all along the path to Edgartown, and then came back a different route. And that's when I realized that. And actually, my father didn't feel that well. He was pretty older at the time, and he wasn't feeling. And when we were back at Vineyard Haven, someone came right out of a bar and said, "Here, sir, you need some water. You need some water." I could tell you don't feel well. And the people were so great and so supportive. It was such a nice place.
Oh, that's nice here. It is a nice community here.
Yeah, it is. And hopefully I can get back there soon. But
This year we're hosting the fly fishing film tour, July, August, and September. So if any of you guys are around, it'd be a fun time to come out.
interesting.
It's exciting. So logistics, I think you hit on it that if we do take the ferry out either to Edgartown or Vineyard Haven, you would pick people up so you don't actually have to have a car. If we're just going to do a half-day trip or even a full-day trip.
Easily pick you up right at the ferry. There's a ferry that comes from Falmouth to Edgartown, and then the other ones go to Vineyard Haven or Oak Bluffs. Same, leaving out of New Bedford or Woods Hole or Falmouth. It's super, super easy. If you did want to spend the night, that's easy too, and you don't need to bring a car. The public transportation here is awesome. We also just got Uber, which is like a huge breakthrough.
Nice. So you could grab your gear, come on out, store it at your shop, and then grab a hotel that night and go out a second day.
Yeah. I rent an Airbnb above the shop too, which I give a deal to clients, but it's pretty booked. But if it's not, I'm happy to recommend places as well. Or I can pick you up right at the ferry.
Cool.
It's a 45-minute ferry too. It's super easy. And the snack bar just opened up, which is great. Because that makes the ride way better.
Fantastic. Well, Abbie, you did, as everyone had said, a fantastic presentation. What
Thank
you
you.
really, what really hit me is your in-depth knowledge of all the seasons and the variety that's out there. It's not just striper fishing, which we don't necessarily have to put pressure on just one fish. We can go after other fish, and your depth of knowledge around all the other fisheries and populations and techniques and stuff is definitely very apparent. So hopefully some of you or more of you can get out there one day and team up with Abbie and get on her boat or waiting.
Yes.
I have to look for a date and see. How booked are you right now, Abbie? Probably more weekends, right?
June, I'm almost fully booked, if not fully booked. My brother guides for me as well, though, who's an awesome guide, and he's not fully booked yet. And then I still have some availability. It's getting less and less, though,
Yeah.
day by day.
What about
If you
further
could
out
do
in
midweek, it's better. Pardon?
Yeah. What about further out in the Abbie Bonita season in the fall?
September will be fully booked by July, probably.
Yeah.
That being said, I can usually kind of sneak some people in here or there.
Yeah.
My brother isn't fully booked either, but yeah, I do fill up super, super quickly just because the Derby is so crazy.
I can imagine.
But yeah, just call me or email me. If you don't remember my email, it's just on my website. There's a contact us form that goes right to my inbox. If I don't respond, it's because I'm on the water, and I will the next morning or that night. I promise.
Fantastic. So Abbie, again, thank you very much. And
Thank
for all
you,
of our
guys.
members, thank you for joining us this evening for a great presentation. And please remember to hit the link, because we're trying to figure out in the fall, indoor, outdoor, or you're going to stay home and be safe. I think things are going to be a lot better this fall. So we're hopefully going to do some more in-person events.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Abbie. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.